The stone will go through the grinding process so you can actually see exactly what the process is on there. Very flat, lots of water. The stone should be the point where when you put water onto it, the water actually sits on the surface, it doesn't soak through. It's very important, the water, so do be mindful of that. The knife we're going to hold in the hand like that, with a good firm grip on it, with the finger on the spine. I'm going to put the knife at about a 25-degree angle onto the stone itself, which is there. And now I'm holding it down flat with my first 3 fingers there. This is a high carbon blade, so I can afford to give it a bit of a shallow angle because it's a hard steel and it can take it. Conventionally, you should be looking at putting about 2 10-pence pieces at the end of the blade, and the angle that you get is what you actually want, and that's the sort of angle that most people will be sharpening their stainless steel knives at. So you literally place the blade onto the end there, you lift it up to the angle, desired angle, and just literally run it up and down very flat like that. Normally in most conventional uses about 20 strokes or thereabouts should be sufficient to grind back a good quality blade. If your knife has gone very blunt, you may have to do this a little bit more. Once I've done it a few times, if I then just run my finger very carefully across the blade, if I can feel at the tiniest hair of a ridge there, it's called the burr. What you've effectively done is sharpened the blade so thin that the material is actually rolling over. So that one's nearly ready. Now the sound is becoming very abrasive, so I'm going to pour a little bit more water onto the stone. Now you can see why I've set this thing up with a bucket or basin underneath it. Now I can feel it there. So I'm going to move on to the next bit of the blade. I've worked on that part of the blade first. Now we're going to work on that part of the blade. So again, the same angle. Now it's very, very important that you maintain that angle very evenly. Most people, and be careful of this, most people, when they're using a stone for the first time, they have a tendency to scoop the blade as it takes it across, rather than keeping it very even. Please be mindful of that, because otherwise you will get an uneven angle in the end of your blade, and you won't get anywhere near the sort of sharpness that you'll be capable of producing if you take a little bit more care and time over it. And now I've got the burr on this side as well. So now I turn the knife over at about, and this time I'm not going to do such a steep angle. I'm going to do it slightly shallower. And again the same thing. Hold the blade very firmly. Put your finger or thumb onto the spine like that, and the 3 fingers go on. Now, it's quite important that when you're actually doing this, you apply the pressure to the blade edge and not to the center of the knife. Otherwise, you'll find that you're pushing it down at the same time as you're trying to push it forward, and that can be a little bit ineffective. So, onto the edge, and that's why you've got to be very careful in doing this, and literally just 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Next section. Now, that's pretty much the regrinding work done. What we now need to do is to finish the sharpening off. So we turn the stone over onto its smoother, harder side. Again, lots of water. Make sure that the water is running on top and then it's not soaking into the stone itself. And the same process all over again. Finger on the spine, firm grip on the blade, 3 fingers onto the blade edge, 25 degrees onto the stone, and then lift it up, that 2 10-pence pieces worth at the back there. And again, now can you hear the sound is much softer and it's much smoother? It's because we're working. This is very much like using a sandpaper. The rougher the sandpaper, the rougher the finish, the smoother the sandpaper, the smoother the finish. It's exactly the same thing applies here. So we're now using the smooth side of the stone, and we'll get a very nice polished edge on it. Now again, I can hear that abrasive sound, so more water on top. Maintaining that angle and the consistency of angle, the consistency of pressure all the time, so that the same amount of work is being done on every part of that blade. This side is now done. So I'm going to turn the blade over to this other side, thumb on the spine, nice firm grip, 3 fingers onto the edge, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. I'll just finish off that tip because this is a classical Suba shaped knife here, and it's designed for fruit and vegetables, and I want it to be very sharp at the very tip end as well because I do a lot of cutting there myself. Now any blade worth its salt should be able to be cut, say something like that, by simply placing it on there and just literally sliding it through without any pressure at all. That's the result of proper sharpening. Now, when you get the kit from JKC, they actually provide you with a little guide. Now, you may have seen these. They're available commonly in most cook shops, and they call them water sharpening guide rails. And what you do with it is you clip it onto the back of the knife there. So it actually provides you with an angle. So when you place your blade, you can see that it's giving you the exact desired angle between that and the stone. Now these clips do go on very tightly and they can scratch your knives, so try practicing on old knives that aren't perhaps as valuable, and then do it. As you can see, it has scratched the blade just by putting it on there. Otherwise, use a bit of plastic like cling film or something like that first and then put the guide onto it, but do be very careful because it is prone to slip because it's very, very tight as you're putting it on there, so do be careful as you're doing that. Finally, the most common method is using a steel. Now this particular one is a high-grade ceramic steel, but you may have a carbon steel which has grooves in it at home, or you may have a diamond steel which has a slightly abrasive surface on it. This one actually is the same sort of material that's inside the little water wheel sharpener that I was showing you before. It's actually an aluminum ceramic steel. The idea of using the steel is exactly the same. Now, with a steel, you can realign a blade, i.e. if you've been using it a lot for sort of very heavy work, like say going like that, and the blade has actually flattened out, you can realign that on a steel. If you use the more classic way of cutting, which is to use a roll action like that, because we can't hold the blade absolutely vertically each time, and depending on whether you hold it to the right or to the left, the blades bend over a little bit. Now all these bends and flattenings are very, very microscopic on the edge of the blade, so they're not visible to the naked eye, but then nonetheless they're still there, and it can be taken away with the steel. I personally find the steel not the most effective way because it's very difficult to keep control of it. You've got a long rod here, and that has the tendency to move around like this. Even with the tiniest bit of pressure, obviously it's going to move. You've got a blade that's sitting on top of it, and you've got to hold that angle absolutely evenly all the way through a stroke on each side of the blade. Now, some people, and you may have seen this on television, kind of do it towards themselves, like that. Now that's very dangerous because if that blade was to slip, and it's going to go right into your hand there. So the best method I find in the house is to do it away from yourself like that on each side. Now the best system is to use the steel and secure it firmly on something like a table, and rather than actually holding the knife at the angle, the 2 10-pence piece worth at the end there, I'm going to hold my steel at an angle and draw my blade through straight. So 1, 2, I don't need to use a lot of pressure, I can use a lot more control and just literally move it like that. You don't need to use a lot of aggression, you just need to make sure that the stroke is very smooth and it's very even. And the other thing that I find with the steel is that because it's very difficult to control it, and it's very difficult to get it to start from the very end, you invariably find that people's knives have got a little bit of a bow at the back there, and then they go into the cut. It's not good for the profile of the blade, because if you then put it down flat, and if it doesn't cut all the way through evenly, and doesn't touch the surface evenly all the way through, you'll have bits that can't be cut. But using that, we've just done that on this particular knife here, and I think you'll find that the results are fairly acceptable. It's cutting very nicely and very, very thin slices.
Ah,
To recap, we've learned about 3 different methods of sharpening, using a ceramic water wheel, a whetstone, and finally a steel. When using the water wheel, simply fill with water and run along the groove indicated. When using the whetstone, first soak the stone for an hour. Second, place the whetstone on a wet towel and keep a jug of water ready. Then, if using the angle guide, slide it onto the back of the blade and remember to keep it touching the stone when grinding. When using freehand, place the spine of the knife against your forefinger or thumb and grip the knife firmly with the 3 fingers of the other hand. Keep a consistent angle of approximately 2 10-pence pieces on the reverse side of the blade onto the stone and rub along it at an angle. You will work each small section off the blade bit by bit by bit. When using the steel, it's important to remember to keep the blade perfectly straight when running across the rod. Like with most things, in order to excel at something, you need to practice. This applies here too. It's very important, after you familiarize yourself with some of the techniques that I've shown you today, that you continue practicing them regularly, because it's very important to get your hands set at those angles and to maintain that evenness. Now, I can't stress it enough. The way to achieve a sharp knife is to have a nice shallow angle and keep it consistent all the way through the edge of the blade. I hope that you've enjoyed this little brief exploration into the art of knife sharpening.